970 WGTK gives you Let's Talk with Dr. Stan Frager. From relationship problems to family feuds, he's got all the advice and expert help you'll need. Dr. Frager is here ready to lend an ear or a shoulder if you need it. Now, here's Dr. Stan Frager.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm psychologist Stan Frager with you every Sunday night from 8 until the 10 o'clock hour, and it's family night here. Well, I tell you what, last week sounded like real family. Even my Uncle Harry called in. What can I tell you? It was fascinating. In any event, I'm glad that you're with us tonight, and I think you will find it very helpful. We're going to talk about co-parenting after divorce this first hour, because we know that 50% of all marriages end up divorce. So it may not apply to you, but it could apply to your next-door neighbor, could apply to your children, could apply to grandchildren, could apply. You're going to know somebody who's going through a divorce. I mean, it's just going to happen. The probabilities with 50% of all these marriages in divorce means that's going to happen. And typically there are children involved. And so what do you do? How do you handle that? The children, that wasn't a choice. You brought them into the world. We'll talk about that more. Let me tell you who's with us this first hour tonight. Dr. Eli Karam is a clinician, specializes in couples and family therapy. He has a private practice here in Louisville, Kentucky. He's currently president-elect of the Kentucky Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. And in addition to all of that, he's the assistant professor in the family therapy program, or a assistant professor in the family therapy program in our famed Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. Why do I say famed? Because I'm professor emeritus from the Kent School of Social Work. We like Kent School. So it's great having Dr. Karam back. Good to see you.
Oh, it's good to be back, Stan.
Yeah.
Looking good.
Good to have you with us. So, yeah, you know that children are the first to suffer from a divorce. I mean, people go through a divorce because they're in a lot of pain. It started off, they were in love, they were happy, life is great. Now, for whatever reasons, they can't stay together. And by the way, our lines are open for your questions and comments. 571-2428. We're in the 502 area code, 571-2428. And so, let's just start off. Parents are going through a divorce. What do children need to know? And does it differ between what a 4 or 5-year-old needs to know and what a 10-year-old needs to know?
Sure does. You're exactly right. Needs, whatever you tell your children needs to be developmentally appropriate. And we talk to, as you said, a 4 and 5-year-old, much different than we talk to teenagers. But what should they know? Well, first they should know, I think, first and foremost, that the divorce is not their fault. Children, even though that we think would know better, they really take it personally. In fact, will even act out as they see their parents.
Okay, act out. I know what that means, but
yes.
But help my Sunday night family.
Sure. School problems, behavior problems at home, causing a disruption to bring the parents together around them. So any attention, including bad attention, is better than no attention. If we get that bad attention, maybe we can keep mom and dad together. And it works, I think, that way on an unconscious level for a lot of children. So they need to know the divorce is not their fault, that even though mom and dad might not be together anymore or do not care about each other in the same way, they care about you, and they're not going anywhere. And you don't have to pick sides. You, as the child, you can be loved by both mom and dad.
I find that it often happens that a lot of times that when the child is with, say that the child is with dad, but mom's in the house, she's in the room, and they don't want to lose their love for mom, so they kind of either are disrespectful or don't do what dad asks. And sometimes vice versa. They can really want dad's support and love, so they act mean to mom.
Right. These loyalties are really tested, and they need to know that, you can just be yourself, and we'll love you for who you are, and you don't have to act different. And another thing kids should know, parents need to be honest with them, but not too honest. And we'll talk about that a little later, what you shouldn't say to them. But, you shouldn't try to sugarcoat it, and one day dad has his stuff and he's just moved out, and it hits the kids like a ton of bricks. You need to be able to talk to them. So much planning goes into, thinking about getting married. The same planning should be going into thinking about dissolving the relationship or getting a divorce. And people say The Good Divorce, which is a title of a very good book and a lot of research that has been done, and that's an oxymoron, but it's really not. I mean, you can't have a good divorce, and that's going to happen today because it's two decisions. You know, when we used to be lumped together when we get married and we have children, those are all put together, but it's really not that way, Dr. Stan. It's two decisions. You get married, you may not be married to that person for life, but when you have a child, you are going to be a co-parent with them for life. So you have to really think and plan if you're going to exit the relationship. You must do the right things, as we'll talk about this hour, to preserve the integrity, to be good co-parents.
But we hear this expression that the children will sometimes blame themselves.
Right.
And it's hard. How is it that they blame themselves for the parents getting divorced? What is the feeling they get that maybe they should or should not have done something that would have kept their parents together?
Oh, if they only would have done better in school or wouldn't have gotten in trouble with their friends and the parents had to come and pick them up. So a lot of these behaviors, which would be developmentally normal, kids mess up, adults mess up too, but the child puts extra meaning onto that and blames themselves and goes too hard on themselves and said, well, Mom and Dad just got tired of us. And it depends the type of conflict. You know, we think sometimes too high conflict relationships, and those kids usually see the divorce coming, but there's also conflict avoidant couples that have just kind of don't know how to bring things up and have fallen out in love, and that divorce looks different and is more gradual. So those kids and with those type of parents might not see it coming, and they might be hit with a ton of bricks when Mom and Dad say we're not going to be together anymore.
All right, well, what about the kinds of things children are worried about when parents go through a divorce? And what is the difference between what a 4 or 5-year-old is worried about versus what a teenager might be worried
Teenagers
about?
are really honest. I'm dealing with a teenager right now whose parents are divorcing in my private practice, and he just wants to know, where's my stuff going to be? Do I get to keep my car? What's going on with that? Am I going to get to finish my senior year at my school? Younger children, sometimes too, are really worried about the parent is leaving. Where's Daddy going to go? How often am I going to see him? So you need to be as specific as possible. That's why if you don't have a good parenting plan and you're not on the same page with your co-parent before you finalize your divorce, the children will experience that confusion and ambiguity much in the same way that you would experience any type of loss. So you need to be able to be specific as possible on the plan and what's going to happen and when.
In a high percentage of the divorces, the typical arrangement is the children stay with the mother, and then they see their father one weekend every 2 weeks, which I always thought was not a good thing. I thought it should be much more frequent if possible. I never have understood the courts deciding that 2 days once every 2 weeks was enough time for Dad to be with the children. That kind of makes me upset.
I think that the courts, while they're well-intentioned, are very different than helping professionals like you and myself. So I have a hard time, too, with some of these decisions the courts made. But, just the idea of kind of physical custody versus legal custody are different issues. And we know from all the research it says father involvement is huge. So it needs to happen, whether they stay with the mom majority of the time or not. Incorporating fathers into the plan, when possible, those are the children, as we'll talk about the research later, that do the best. That the father, maybe they're not staying with the father every night, but the father comes over, picks them up, takes them to their game, comes over and has dinner with them, even if it's not their night. That is really important.
What does the literature look like in terms of the research when it comes to how children do of families that divorce versus those families that stay together? And you always get that question where you'll see parents who say, well, I stayed together for the benefit of the children, and yet they're fussing and fighting with each other every night.
Right, but one of the biggest myths is that we should stay together for the children. That is not, in this day and age, a good reason to stay married if that's all that's happening, especially if you're in one of those high-conflict relationships, because you're teaching your children, and they're developing a blueprint for relationship, which is yelling, which is disrespect, contempt, and we know that those kids do actually worse in some cases from the researchers than if their parents would have divorced and divorced the right way. But generally, to answer your question, through all the years of longitudinal research since the boom in divorce in the mid-'70s, and these studies started coming out in the 90s that followed kids up, said generally children from divorce do slightly worse, but there's actually more similarities than differences. And it's really important not just to know that finding, but how to interpret it and to look at the risk